everybody. Welcome to My Houston 2040. This is our monthly happy hour for Houston's urban, eco, creative, and hungry minds. It's co-hosted by Houston Tomorrow, Citizens Transportation Coalition, American Planning Association, and the Congress for the New Urbanism. My name is Caitlin McNeely. I work for Houston Tomorrow, and the way that this works is we have two speakers, and the first speaker talks about a subject, whatever we ask them to come talk about, whatever they're really good at talking about. And our second speaker gives their vision for Houston in 2040. So we ask them to come and talk about what they think Houston will be like in 2040, what they want Houston to be like in 2040, and what they want us to do to make Houston like they want it to be in 2040. And so tonight we have Amar Mohite, the Transportation Division Manager for the City of Houston Planning and Development Department. And he's going to talk about the major thoroughfare and freeway plan and the forthcoming complete streets and transportation plan, and various other long acronyms, which I'll let him just handle that and let you guys know what all that means. And then Jeff Reichman is going to come up and give us his vision. So first and foremost, please welcome Amar.
Thank you so much to Houston Tomorrow Citizens Transportation Commission, Coalition and other organizations for doing this and keeping it going for a number of years. I've been here a couple of times. Again, my name is Amar Mohite and I'm in the Planning and Development Department. I've been in Houston since 2002. My first job out of grad school, and so but it has been quite a good experience, and Houston's like home for us, for me and my two kids and a wife and a family, and so it's been a great time in Houston. So I'm here to talk about the more mundane subject, the Major Thoroughfare and Freeway Plan and the Houston Complete Streets and Transportation Plan. So a little bit, I want to talk in terms of a timeline, what happened in the city, so that you can see changes in the city. I was not there in 1942, but the Major Thoroughfare and Freeway Plan was first adopted in 1942. It was called the city's it was called it was not Major Thoroughfare Plan rather than the Major Thoroughfare and Freeway Plan. And it basically was a smaller area inside the loop and the street network within it. And it was in the city of Houston, in the absence of zoning, we have governed with rules and regulations. The Major Thoroughfare and Freeway Plan is probably one of the few map documents that the city uses to really guide infrastructure growth within the city. And it's really tied in with all ordinances, all major ordinances that relate to transportation, land use within the city of Houston. So it's really sort of a principal document that lays the fabric of how the city is growing. So in 1942 we adopted the first plan, and then since then it was not updated annually, but every few years we did an update. And then in the 60s, it started becoming more of an annual process of updating the Major Thoroughfare and Freeway Plan. The most important thing, in my opinion, about the Major Thoroughfare and Freeway Plan is it is the only tool we have that really preserves or dictates the preservation of right-of-way as the city grows. And it's probably one of the critical tools we have that really says that if you're going to develop this piece of land, you need to preserve this corridor for infrastructure growth. Now, it primarily I think so now, not so now, but probably in the 80s and 90s, it primarily was focused on vehicular circulation and I think so. We realized that we just had one classification since 1942 to the early 90s, which was a major thoroughfare, and it did talk about. It said that it had a line type that still is used. Is it and it only deals with right-of-way. It used to only deal with right-of-way. It didn't deal with number of lanes or any of those things until 1995. And it says whether it's sufficient width right-of-way or to be acquired right-of-way, or it is to be widened right-of-way. And that was the only thing on the map, but it was still a very strong tool that the city used to grow. In the 1995, the city really did 1993, we did a study called the Hierarchical Study of the Major Thoroughfare and Freeway Plan. That really looked at what is the street hierarchy that the city needs. What was happening was neighborhood, if they felt that there was a lot of traffic coming through their neighborhood, they used to come to the city and say, I want to remove this from the Major Thoroughfare and Freeway Plan. And the city felt that it didn't have any other tools, either to keep it or remove it. And so the city did the study and really adopted more of a, at that point we adopted principal thoroughfares, which was a step higher, which is really, Westheimer outside 610 or Highway 6, some of the major corridors in the city, and a collector street classification. The first time we got a street classification that was more appropriate to different contexts. Fast forward to 2006, David and a bunch of other people during Bill White's administration, there was a big push to really look at drainage, neighborhood protection, and mobility as three key things. It was an abbreviated version of a general plan, something like that. Three key things that came out of that, and the planning department, working with public works, started looking at, okay, what does this mobility or mobility component mean to the city? And by then the city had started to realize that we cannot just build our way out of congestion, and we cannot keep on widening thoroughfares, and it was just financially infeasible, and it would come at a significant cost to the community if we kept on widening our thoroughfares from 2 lanes to 4 lanes to 6 lanes. And so the city did a comprehensive mobility plan, and we called it the city mobility planning. A number of people from the community were involved, and it really looked at saying that instead of just making our streets wider, let's become smarter, and let's look at our street not just as an individual segment, but really a system of as a network, as a system of street, and how can we make the system effective rather than a street carry more capacity. Also, it looked at we should have a more typological approach in terms of look at context, look at densities, growth, and what kind of modes of travel, transit, ped, bike. And so it came up with a series of recommendations, and to some extent it got adopted. There was a big push to adopt these things, and it got adopted, but it got adopted in a weird way. Since we were doing like a 30,000 feet look at the city, of saying where we project growth to happen and where we project a lot of congestion to happen. And so we ended up looking at it and saying, okay, we can do it, but we don't know how to apply it to neighborhoods. Because while we may have a typology, we never have discussed with the neighborhood if this thing makes sense. The other thing is, if you're looking at the future, you're not just looking at the context of the neighborhood or an area as it is today. You really need to ask, what does this neighborhood want to be in 20 years, 30 years? Because if you're going to reconstruct a street, it's going to be for the next 30, 50 years. So you really need to understand what this community is today, what the community will be in 20, 30 years. The other key thing was, a lot of times when we do things, we typically think that the society is not going to change. We are going to behave the way we are behaving today for the next 30 years. If we are driving cars, we'll still be driving cars just the way we are today. And so, and a lot of our models don't really currently don't have the ability of looking at that behavioral change so well. The traditional travel demand models and things like that. And so we said that let's, instead of just saying, okay, we have various street cross sections and typologies and let's apply it citywide, we said, let's start doing more sub-regional studies where we can ask the people, and not necessarily a neighborhood level study, but a little, because to understand the system, you need to have good boundaries to understand the system. You just cannot look at, Westheimer Westheimer, Fairview, and two north-south streets, maybe Shepherd and Kirby, and say, Shepherd and Dunleavy, and say, let's do a study. That's too small an area, because you really need to look at an area where the overall people make decisions as a system. So we started doing a number of these studies. We have done 6 of these as of now. We did one, the early one that started was the one in this area, which was called the Inner West Loop Mobility Study, and then another one was in the East End. And what we started looking at development potential, growth potential in these areas, looking at, and then doing projections using traditional tools that we have. But then we stopped and asked ourselves a question. If the city decides to do, if the model is telling us that if we made Dunleavy 4 lanes, it will carry 30,000 trips. The question we started asking, do we want 30,000 trips on Dunleavy? And so, I think so. And what I want to talk about, this is evolution of a city. Means this is not where we started with, but as we evolved over these studies, we started asking the right questions. That I hope to think so that we are asking the right questions. And so, we did the citywide study was done in 2009. And before that, around 2006, 2009, we also did Metro's push. We did the Transit Corridor Ordinance, which was a big thing. It was a 3-year-long effort to do the study and develop an ordinance. It was a first step in the right direction. It needs to be revamped and become a little bit more. Step 2 needs to be done. The next version of the ordinance needs to be done. But it was a first step to really talk about walkability and access to transit and all of those kinds of things. So the mobility sub-regional studies really started in 2011 when we started doing the studies. And then the community started pushing the city towards, Mayor Parker towards adopting something related to complete streets. And the city had really invested a lot of time and effort, and we had existing tools in place. And so when we were asked to develop a complete streets policy, we ended up thinking, how do we use the tools that we think so are working and mold them into creating a city's complete street policy? And that's when in November 2013, the mayor adopted the executive order on complete streets for the city of Houston. And what we did with the executive order was to say that these are the things that the city is doing. And while the city is doing things, there is still limitation in what people don't think so that what is being implemented really reflects the people's vision of what a complete street is. And so we said, really, we need to look at how do we, so I want to talk a little bit about complete streets. So when we looked at complete streets, the city's position on complete streets is a complete street is not all modes and all streets. It's really making sure that all modes function within an area in a systematic way, where you may not have bike facilities on all streets, but as long as you can provide east-west bike facilities within that area, it meets the intent. And primarily the reason was, again, right of way, real estate. We have limited real estate, and how do we use a limited real estate effectively? And a good example is, if you look at Westheimer, priority on Westheimer, in my mind, this is my opinion, is really the pedestrians, to some extent vehicular circulation, and more importantly, transit, the transit connectivity. So, and to some extent parking for the businesses. And means I could see bicycling being done a block over, but that's my view of it. I think so. That is a community decision, and it needs to go through a process in which the community gets to prioritize what are the important things that needs to be accommodated. And that's really where the public engagement piece of what we were missing until now came in. And that piece came in really with last year, with the pre-engineering process and the CIP process. Really, first time with the Greenbrier project was the first project where public works and engineering went to the community in the pre-implementation phase, almost like ready to implement phase, that okay, this is what we think so we can do with the street. Let us know if we got it right, and they got a lot of input. And then they changed the way based on the community's input. And I think so, to me, that is really what the overall complete streets transportation plan is about, is how do you engage communities in making decisions about transportation in such a way that you keep the intent of, you ensure that you keep the intent of the roadway, at the same time you make sure that it does not have negative impacts on the community that it's passing through. And I think so that's, and this has been a little bit difficult. It has been a lot of times when we started with complete streets, a lot of people said, oh, all we have to do is put all the modes on one map and that's complete streets. And I kept on saying, no, I think so complete streets is more about how do various agencies talk to each other before they make a decision of doing improvements on a street, and how do we engage the community in the process in making sure that they feel that the outcome that is there reflects a consensus. I don't ever think so that we'll make everyone happy with the decisions we make, but at least if there is an opportunity where everyone felt that their input was heard, then I think so that is a successful complete streets version. I don't know how much time I have, you have to let me know, but
yeah.
I'm now, this was probably a most layman's term explanation of what started in 1942 with the Major Thoroughfare and Freeway plan, and what's happening with the city's complete streets. But since the mayor adopted the complete streets policy, so just to give you an example of how everything is tied up, so we have the general plan at a very high level, and then that really is the city's goals and objectives and strategies. That really informs the city's complete streets and transportation plan. And the complete streets and transportation plan is really make sure a lot of things that I talked about, it takes into account the context and some of the other, and context to me is not just the density, but it is also the land use. Not just the land use, but also the density. Downtown, residential in downtown should look completely different than residential in River Oaks. And the contexts are completely different, or Montrose, or Upper Kirby, or, so I just, that's to me the context piece. And I think so the modes really in our minds are the vehicular, which is the Major Thoroughfare and Freeway plan, because it's primarily designed around the functional classification of a roadway, which is the vehicular classification of a roadway. Your bike plan, we don't have a pedestrian plan, but people keep on saying, why don't we have a pedestrian plan? I said, you cannot do a pedestrian plan for 676 square miles. There's just no meaningful way. But you can have a policy that says that based on this street type, this is the kind of pedestrian environment you can have. You can take a typological approach to it. A parking plan, and again the same thing with parking. You cannot do a parking plan like a traditional parking plan, but you could have policies as to how parking works on certain streets based on the land uses and those kinds of things. A rail plan, which is the rail plan really deals with high-speed rail, freight rail, commuter rail, and then the transit plan that really deals with transit typologies. Currently we only have bus service, we have signature bus service, but that is not necessarily a typology related to street classification, and then the LRT, BRT, which is a fixed right-way system. And so really we need to think about what else is there, and really how do those typologies tie into all these street designs and stuff like that. And a lot of people said, oh, you just put all those lines together and you'll have a complete streets and transportation plan. And I said, you know, we don't have zoning. It means every street is a mixed-use street, because there are all uses on all streets in Houston unless it's a deed restricted single-family residential neighborhood. So I was scratching my head for 2 years for trying to figure out how do I even give a street a context, except for those that are stable residential areas. So those are some of the challenges, and I think so we are figuring things out. Just one sentence. Much of our focus has been until now. I think so. When we started doing it, we knew if we do something, it will, by the time, even if we start planning with the new roadways being designed, it will be another 5 or 6 years by the time people see anything on the ground. So we also focused on how do we start, my group started reviewing each and every drawings that is going under engineering, design, and construction to really, we could not do much because they were further along, but making sure that the sidewalk was appropriate, or if there was a bike facility we needed to add something, if the plan was not too far along, asking those questions, making sure if TxDOT is rebuilding a street, making sure there was sidewalk and ADA compliance and those kinds of things. Because those are construction projects and people may see something tomorrow. So that is really what is happening within the city with the Houston Complete Streets and Transportation Plan. If there are any questions later,
no, I left you time for questions.
Okay, if there are any questions, I'm glad to answer.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you for, you've been a good partner in all this.
Thank you.
So if we're trying to say now that the city is going to do a comprehensive mobility plan, and you call that other thing, yes, then that will include transit. And so is the major thoroughfare plan the place you would begin to say the line on the map for the dedicated right-of-way for some sort of high-quality transit goes on this street? And so, in other words, you would say, okay, we know in the future we need dedicated right-of-way on Westheimer or Richmond or whatever. Is that the way to do that? Is that where you can put that, which means, by the way, you're creating a new street type in the major thoroughfare plan, essentially, I guess, and you have the urban corridor plan to back that up with the idea of transit corridors and streets and rules that are different there in Chapter 42 and all that.
So if you look at the major thoroughfare and freeway plan more from the functional classification to more of a right-of-way preservation tool, it makes it simpler. So if you say Westheimer, or let's take a less controversial example, Richmond. So let's say if you need 4 lanes on Richmond, plus you need transit on Richmond, and pedestrian amenities and those kinds of things on Richmond, what is the right-of-way needed? And so what we started doing was, when we started, so as we start lining up these lines, when it made sense, as we started going through these sub-regional studies, because the sub-regional studies really allowed us to have that public input component. And it's still difficult for people because they're looking at a larger area and nothing's going to happen in the next couple of years. But it allowed us to really get a sense of what people want and didn't want. And so we started taking these multimodal recommendations, and because the only tool I have, regulatory tool I have, is major thoroughfare and freeway plan, I started updating the major thoroughfare and freeway plan to reflect the appropriate right-of-way on that thing. So until we figure out how the Complete Streets has any regulatory authority, it would be the Complete Streets and so if you choose the major thoroughfare as a right-of-way preservation tool, you can say the plan determines what the needs are, and it depicts it on a citywide plan, and the right-of-way acquisition tool is the major thoroughfare and freeway plan. So the major thoroughfare and freeway plan is a little bit narrower, but it functions. It's an existing tool that we can make function, because other than that, we really need to revamp Chapter 42 to link it and stuff like that. And I don't know if I've figured that piece out, but I think so. It's working. But I also want to say that it's just like, last year Public Works started doing public meetings and really engaging the community in corridor design. I was in a meeting 2 days ago where it said that all future meetings, when we start doing these planning things, Metro has a seat at the table to really start looking at how bus stops are designed and stuff like that as a part of that thing. So I think so things are going in the right direction, but I think so it's still going to take some time. One thing I do want to mention is, during the process we realized it's not just putting, the mayor was very frustrated one time, and I thought I gave an executive order, why are you guys coming and upset with me? And it's like, well, the executive order is one thing. People who have been doing business in the industry for the last 30 years, you're asking them to suddenly change everything they know about. And that's a challenge. Means working with the engineers we have in house, educating them, bringing them up to speed with these policies, working with the industry. They are used to doing the 4-lane boulevard, 100 feet right of way all day long. They know how to design that. Suddenly you're telling them, no, that may not necessarily make sense. Move the curb closer, have a better pedestrian environment on the outside. You may want to think about a cycle track. You're complicating things for them. And so it's been an educational process for us also. And so, but I think so things are, I think so things are going in a right direction where we are asking the right questions. To me, and I always felt that the most important piece was the public engagement component, and not waiting till the street is ready to be constructed, but when the street is being designed, if you ask the right input from the, and I think so it's asking the right questions at those meetings is also important. And I think so we are learning our lessons. I think so this was Public Works' first year in really engaging the community in these exercises, and I think so it's going to get better. So.
Yeah, good presentation. I've got one comment. I don't know if it's really planning or if it's actually public works, but once you've got the stuff on the paper, once you've got it through the public comment period, once you're actually going to put it out there and start breaking ground, something gets lost for the pedestrians. I'll give a case in point. I'll be walking right on Woodway, and the guy in construction says, the sidewalk's closed, you got to get on the other side of the street. Where you got all that traffic going. How am I going to get on the other side of the street unless I go back a half a mile? Who's responsible for that?
I think so that's the, so when we go to detour plans, and we have had those issues, and I think so when you have a few of those high profile cases, it always helps. People start looking at making sure that the pedestrian detours, bike detours are taken into consideration when those things are done. But I think so it benefits from having a vocal community to raise those issues, so that I think so just because our engineers are not used to always take those things into consideration or assume that yes, the pedestrian can run across the street because of sidewalk at that location, they can start making better decisions and choices as we go through these review processes. So. But there is a detour plan every time we do improvements to street.
I have one more question. So how do you think that the Complete Streets and Transportation Plan will end up interfacing with the Major Thoroughfare and Freeway Plan? And do you think that the Complete Streets and Transportation Plan is going to lead to new codification? Like, will it be a plan that becomes codified and leads to new codes and regulations? Or is it like,
the way I see it, you may have certain, like, if you adopt a bike plan, example, if you have a bike plan as an ordinance, then you have a new map. If the city metro adopts a new transit plan with transit classification and stuff, we will integrate it into, so if you look at the Thoroughfare plan, it has currently right of way, street classification, if it's a major thoroughfare, collector street, minor collector, whatever the designation of the roadway is, the right of way need and the number of lanes, the number of vehicular lanes projected, the maximum number of vehicular capacity that we are preserving along that corridor. So the way I see it, rather than it just have that information, you really will see a table of the name of the street, the vehicular classification, the bike classification, the transit classification, the pedestrian classification, in most cases we won't have a rail, because rail generally, high-speed rail or any kind of rail would need its own right-of-way. And then some sort of a parking information about it. And then the multimodal elements is what is the context, and what is the land use context, and what is the density context. So that is what I think is the table going forward. And we are still trying to figure out how do we release that, because putting the table together is easy. Does it? We still need to go back and make sure that we have the right of way to do it. And I think so that is going to be a little bit of a, it's going to take some time. It's not going to be right the first day.
Yeah, one more.
Real quick, you said the light rail's different because it has its own right of way.
No. I said the high-speed rail. No, just rail. The rail plan.
Bus rapid transit will have its own right of way.
That's transit. That's all transit. That's a transit plan. The transit plan is a part of the complete streets and transportation plan, even as the rail plan is. I'm just saying most streets are not going to have high-speed rail unless it is the last mile of the segment when you're coming into inner city and the high-speed rail is above grade on an inner city roadway, or a commuter rail is above grade on an inner city roadway.
So that right of way that's preserved in the major thoroughfare and freeway plan that's preserved for vehicular traffic.
It
seems like that.
It doesn't say.
Like that. Some right of way will, like with the bike plan, will get preserved for other things, or like.
It's not just preserved for vehicular traffic. It's preserved for moving people. It's not, but it is the existing tool that I have to preserve right of way. I don't have any other tools to preserve right of way. So we are just using that tool in a more effective way, and we have been doing it just because the Thoroughfare classification is there. The Thoroughfare classification just guides you as to design a street, take a look at these kinds of things. Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was awesome. How about another round?
Yeah.
Keep going. So while we let this boot up real quick, thank you, Amar, and this will get going in just a second. And
I think we need to clean the air filter and reset the filter timer.
it always says that.
I work in technology.
Yeah.
So
Never listen to the machines. They don't know what they're talking about. So our next guest is Jeff Reichman. He is the principal at January Advisors, and they are a tech design, development, and consulting firm. They work with everybody from the city of Houston, city council members, departments, to private agencies, nonprofits. He's also the founder of Sketch City, our local civic advocacy hack night collaborative, and he's one of the forces behind the Houston Hackathon, I believe, and he is also my floor mate in our downtown office,
Yes.
although we never see each other because we're always running around in different places, and whenever I pass his office, there's always a huge stack of mail just splayed across the floor because he hasn't been there in so long that they just keep putting it under the doorway. So, but we're very happy to have him here
still
tonight.
alive.
Yeah, he's still here. Very happy to have him here tonight, and he is going to give you his vision for Houston in 2040.
Thank you, guys. I just put this together about an hour ago, so I'm still kind of sounding it all out. As Caitlin said, my name's Jeff Reichman, and I don't really think about my vision for Houston. I don't even know when 2040 is. So I know. And so before I get started, I just wanted to thank David. I wanted to thank Jay. I want to thank Caitlin and Houston Tomorrow. I think Houston 2040 is an incredible just group of people. I geek out on learning about urban planning and all the forces in the bureaucracy that are at work for making sure that we don't die when we get on our bicycles and making sure that we can catch a bus at a reasonable hour. So I think that that's really incredible. And a lot of my work is around that. So as Caitlin said, I run a consulting company called January Advisors, and we started by working with entrepreneurs, and we've slowly evolved into kind of bringing that entrepreneurship and tech mindset into civic tech and city government. So for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been focused mainly on working with public sector clients and nonprofits that deal with the public sector. And for the last 4 months, I've been kind of founding and getting off the ground this nonprofit group called Sketch City. And I'm going to go into what that is in a little bit. So you're going to be surprised with me as to what the next slide is. Oh, I had a whole opening, and I was going to talk about all sorts of stuff, but related to planning, but with absolutely no context. My introduction to urban planning was really trial by fire and doing some technology on the general plan. And in the process, I got to read all the plans that went into the general plan, and it was fascinating. So I was going to talk about what Houston is going to be like in terms of its infrastructure or transit, or we'd all be in like Jetsons, like flying cars. But I don't really know much about that stuff. In fact, I don't really know much about the future at all. But I know kind of the things that I'm doing now and the things that I'm feeling out intuitively and the things that get successful when we're trying to stoke civic engagement. And that's where I'm really keying into what you were saying before, in that we really do need greater citizen engagement. So I want to pause and just say, you should all come out to the Houston Hackathon, houstonhackathon.com, May 14th and 15th. Everyone is welcome, map nerds, data nerds, really any kind of nerd, marketers, writers, designers, good communicators. Anybody with an interest in this hackathon, we welcome you. We get about, I don't know, this many people, about 300 or 400 people showing up, people of all ages, all colors, all genders. They show up with their laptops, and some of them know a lot about technology, and some of them don't know anything about technology, but they know a lot about planning, or they know a lot about health inspections, or they know a lot about cutting grass from blighted properties. And we love to pair these people up together and get them collaborating and seeing what can happen when you put smart people in a room with different disciplines with no real objective other than build something useful. So we tried to carry this on throughout the year, because we only do a hackathon once a year. It's a lot of work. I mean, it's 24 hours long. I'm 37 years old. I like to get 9 hours of sleep a night, so I can only do that once a year. But we do these monthly hack nights where we get about 60 or 70 people out and collaborating on these projects. And slowly but surely, about a year of doing these things, we found that they're working on projects month to month. How do we get them to connect over time? And we kind of moved towards Slack. How many of you have ever used Slack before? You've heard of it? Half the room, okay. So we've got these collaborations going on in parallel. We've got random people in the group working on projects together, and they use these events as touch points to come together, which is really kind of exciting and fun. So I want to shift gears. My main point in all of that is to say, I'm really a big fan of collaboration, and I think when people collaborate rather than sit there and say, I know this and therefore I'm right, really great things can happen. And the hackathon, I think, is proof of that. But I wanted to put up three numbers here and let them soak in. I'm going to read them out loud because I think they're important. It's 212,696, 4,082, and $5,100 million approximately, give or take. These numbers, this is the total number of people who voted in the runoff election. This is the number of votes that Mayor Turner won by, and this is the city budget that he is the chief executive of. And so when we start to think of these things, we start to realize that 4,000 people determine the chief executive of a $5.1 billion, whatever you want to call it, government, corporation, however you want to envision that. That's pretty powerful. Your vote is pretty powerful. We have off-cycle elections. We have runoffs. We have endless campaigns, it seems. Hopefully term limits will ease that a little bit. Well, when push comes to shove, we're talking about a massive amount of money that funds all of these amazing plans and things that we talk about, as well as health inspections and libraries and parks. And we're talking about 4,000 people, less people than live in Montrose, like in this neighborhood right here, determining who wins and who loses, determining issues of, wherever you fall on the political spectrum. There were a lot of things that kind of spread out on the political spectrum in this last election. It's pretty impactful, and I think that's really important. So I do a lot of work to drive voter turnout, and I think that's really tied together with a lot of this collaborative work too. Our voter turnout, it sucks. It's really terrible. I used to use a number of 19%. I think it was a little bit higher because Hero motivated some turnout on the conservative side in this past election. But voter turnout's really bad in this city, and there's a lot at stake. So I started thinking about, well, what does it mean? We've got this kind of collaborative stuff going on, people getting excited. A lot of people don't even vote, but they show up to the hack night, and voting is really one way that they can make a difference. I'm starting to think about, well, how do people stay engaged? Our average voting age, just off the top of my head, is somewhere in the realm of 40 to 50 years old, and the number of people voting below the age of 35 is very, very low. And what I came to the conclusion of is that people don't care about caring. Like, I care about caring. I care that people care about stuff. I like passionate people who just have something in mind. But not a lot of people care about the general act of caring. They care about kittens and puppies, or they care about, they care about not getting food poisoning, or they care about being a good patient advocate for their mom, or they care about all these things that hit home for them. And I think that when I kind of realized this, it was a watershed moment for me where I realized that we can take the thing that everybody has in common at our hack nights, which is tech and a love of tech, and start to pivot it towards the things that they actually care about. I remember I was looking at one of the mayoral forums, and I did a lot of work with the League over this last election, League of Women Voters, and we would get 100 people, 200 people out to a forum, and then I saw an RSVP list on Eventbrite for the BARC animal control forum for all the candidates, and there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. Because people care about stray dogs for a whole variety of reasons, related to wellness, related to accessibility and walkability, related to I care about dogs, or I hit the like button when I see that meme come up. But they don't care about the general act of caring. So saying go vote doesn't make people go vote. Go vote is kind of complicated. And I think that the secret, the missing piece, and the thing that I'm just starting to work on right now, and that I think Houston Tomorrow has been working on for years, and that I think that a lot of organizations are starting to pull together, is how do we get this civic engagement, this activity, and connect it with real outcomes. And it's not hard to connect it with real outcomes, except that we have all these layers in between doing a plan, for example, and fixing the sidewalks. And some of those layers require a lot of money. So one of the things that I'm starting to focus on is this concept of participatory budgeting. And this is a logo from Chicago. It's this idea that you can take a discretionary budget, a council district service fund, a block grant of some kind. You can tag $50,000, $100,000, $1 million, and say to a community, hey, what do you want us to spend this on? What matters to you? And you can crowdsource these ideas and go through a deliberative process of vetting the ideas and pricing them out, and then putting it out to a vote and saying to the citizens, the people in that neighborhood, what do you want to see? And I think it's really powerful for a variety of reasons, because I'm a big fan of challenging frameworks and rules. And with participatory budgeting, normal voting rules don't apply. I mean, again, I do a lot of work with the League, so I'm very familiar with a lot of ways to hack voting and figure out ways to educate voters. But for example, in Boston, they have participatory budgeting, and it's only for youth initiatives, and the only people eligible to vote are between the ages of 16 and 25. In Chicago, their aldermen have participatory budgeting that they can opt into, and it's used as a form of budget transparency. Oh, I have $1 million to spend. Let me show you what I'm spending it on, and I'm being responsive to your needs. It makes a lot of sense when you start to break it down and you start to see this is a really controlled but direct form of democracy. And it makes a real difference when you say, I wait at this bus stop every day, and it's not covered. And if Metro or somebody would just pay $25,000, I don't know how much a covered bus stop costs, but a lot of money. How much?
I think like $9,000.
$9,000 to put a covered bus stop, and you get 30 people voting on that because they use that bus stop every day. It's a really good way to respond. So what this comes down to for me is, I'm not sure what this means in terms of a vision, but I see in 24 years, we're going to have a lot more of this kind of collaboration, these interdisciplinary collaborations, a lot less silos. We're starting to see that breakdown already in the tech world, where we work on projects because we want to open source stuff. And when I first started doing hackathons, people would say, well, why would you work all night and work on something and not get paid? And at the time, I was like, well, why wouldn't you? This is fun, this is cool, like, you can make a difference, you meet cool people. But the reality, the economic reality is that there is an economic imperative to work all night and build something cool. Because you put that on GitHub, and people look at it, and people see your code, and they go, oh, you're really good at this. You're really creative. Maybe you get in the newspaper about it, and you've got this other thing in your back pocket that is an accomplishment that you've earned. So I see these highly collaborative types of deliberation. I see engaged and informed voters, and this is all very optimistic, in case you couldn't tell I'm an optimist. And I see more direct decision-making in an effort to try and bring greater transparency about our problems and ways to address them. I think, to key into what you were saying before about civic engagement, when the city runs civic engagement, they try very, very hard to address as many people as possible, but the toolkit isn't there to be able to reach the person who shows up to the 10 a.m. city council meeting, the person who can only show up to the 9 a.m. Saturday, CIP meeting, and a person like me who's up at 3 in the morning and wants to comment online. There's all these different multi-tactic ways of reaching voters, and I think that in the next few years, we're going to start to see, hopefully, the city embrace these things more and reach more people and draw more strength. Because again, what it comes down to is those 4,000 votes. You know, if you have a block of just a few thousand people who believe the same thing, you have real political power and you can affect real change. And again, maybe this is the optimist in me, but I think that's the case. And you know, the Houston that I want to live in for the next generation looks a lot more like that. So I'm going to put the hackathon picture up there again. And thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Ray, have any questions? Yes, sir.
Well, regarding participatory designation of funds,
It's a mouthful.
I attended a meeting just a couple of months ago of the Montrose district about a parking plan there, and it was mentioned practically as an aside that there was $500,000 that would be spent for local infrastructure for sidewalks. Was barely mentioned, but again, there's an article in today's paper about the lack of transparency in tours and so forth.
Yeah.
How would you go about? Is there a way to increase public input into how such monies are spent?
I think there is. I think with the management districts especially, it's challenging because they serve the business owners. And I was just reading in Houston Press today that the board of the Montrose Management District is actual Montrose business owners are vastly underrepresented on that board. So I think that there's challenges in terms of people who are entrenched. But I also think that there comes a point where you have to be accountable for that money. And if there's enough public outcry to say, why is the Montrose Management District spending money on signage? Why don't we fix curbs, or why don't we fix drainage, or put this money towards something that can benefit everybody? I don't know where everybody, I don't mean to upset him, I don't have a horse in that race in particular. But I think that it's just a matter of introducing the concept, and from our standpoint with Sketch City, we want to create an infrastructure that can help shepherd that along with a lot of different partners in the process. So we're in the process of talking with the city of Bel Air about a small beautification fund that they have and how they could use that. The city right now just got a grant from, I forget what they're called, it's a parks group that's funded by Disney and somebody else. But you can vote for one of 3 parks to receive a $20,000 grant that either improves soccer fields, vegetable gardens, or one other thing, I can't remember what it was. But there's these seeds that exist for bringing transparency and democracy to that spending, but it's not coordinated. And I would love to see Mayor Turner, as he starts to figure out how he's going to run point on educating people about the budget, start to say, well, here's some areas of the budget that we can open up for public input, and we can draw people in that way. I know the finance department and the city controller's office are down with that, but to your point, getting the TERSs on board, getting the management districts on board would be exceptionally powerful.
Great. In fact, what I'd like you to do is talk for about 20 more minutes. But, you had a slide sort of early in there before your collaboration words. Okay, go on a couple more. Sorry. Keep going. About what you've suddenly become interested in.
Oh,
Keep going. Yeah.
okay.
So is Hackathon and Sketch City, is that the point of that? Is that what you're doing? Is there anything else you're thinking about to do this? If it's a second question unrelated to that.
Sure.
So it's 4,082 people, is that right? Something like that that made the difference.
Yeah.
Why does it beg the idea that we have to have more people voting? And I think that would be great.
Sure.
Rather than how do we get those 4,082 people to always make the right decision?
Yeah, no, those are both really good questions. To answer your first question, yes, the kind of secondary mission to the vision is to inject data and technology decision-making into every conversation, into every silo, every department. Everybody should know some fundamentals around data-driven decision-making and how tech can help them. That's our goal with Sketch City, to kind of be an outside innovation group. But our vision is to educate and to kind of bring about some systemic and actual change. To your second question, remind me of your second question one more time.
How do you get the 4,000
Yeah.
people to make the right?
That's a really good point. So last summer I did a bunch of research projects with Bob Stein's Center for Civic Leadership and the League of Women Voters, and we looked at why people voted and what they cared about. And we found that people really care about traffic. It's true. And that people who don't vote actually care about stuff too. They just don't know quite how to express it, or they haven't developed that habit. We talked to a bunch of campaign people, and the campaign people brought up your point, which is you go for the 3 of 3s. You go for the people who are already going to show up to vote, and then you pick that singular issue and you flip them on that issue. We had a hack night in March at Station Houston about democracy. We had Stephen David, who is in the mayor's office now, and he talked a lot about that. And we had Chris Banks, who's a precinct chair for the Democratic Party. And it's very calculated in that regard, where you're looking at the voter pool as zero sum. And I think that if you want to bring about systemic change, you can't do that, because the zero sum is dying. I mean, I don't mean to be crass about it, but like 65 and over is a massive amount of our voters. It's our largest lobby with the AARP. I mean, it's a huge deal, and frankly, there's a generation gap of people coming up who are informed about politics, who are running for office. So if that's a systemic problem, then I would say going about it from a standpoint of educating and increasing the voter pool, hopefully you hope it breaks the way that you want it to politically. I mean, I hope that people vote the way that I want them to politically, but I just care that they vote with their brains, or vote at all. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but I think that to that point of the 4,000 people, the current logic in campaign strategy is stretch that dollar as far as possible. If that person is already presenting at the polls, get them to vote for your guy or your gal, and that's it. Let's do this every 2 years. So,
let me piggyback on that,
yes,
because that's a very, very critical issue. We have voter apathy.
Mm-hmm.
Let me go to I hate to use this as an example, but it's the best one. The drug dealer says, you get a young customer, you got a loyal customer forever.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really bad corollary. But the point is we're not engaging with the kids in the elementary schools, or
That's
the
right.
middle schools, the junior high. It's great to have only 4,000 people you want to concentrate on if you're a candidate, because that's a smaller pool. I've been a candidate. But if you really want civic engagement, you really need to connect with HISD, all the other school districts. You need to get these kids to understand civics, government, and how they can get a palpable change even though they're on a bicycle at 10 years old.
I agree. We had a program with YesPrep. Yeah. We had a program with YesPrep that never got off the ground, which was take your parents to the polls. And we wanted to get the kids to say, teach me how to vote. I want to go vote. And we would have some alternatives for kids whose parents can't vote for whatever reason. But I completely agree. I mean, the reason I know how to vote is because I said I'm 37. I voted in the 1992 presidential election with my mom, went into the voting booth, and she told me who she was voting for and why. And that was pretty profound. And just knowing that having those moments early on made me register to vote when I was 18, and made me go to the polls, and made me take it seriously and spark that interest. So I agree, and I think that if we can get creative about ways in which we can partner with schools, not just Sketch City, and by we, I don't just mean me, I mean everybody. If you espouse a mission of just getting people to present at the polls, then it becomes nonpartisan. It becomes very easy to, I don't know the right words for it, but maybe take a moral high ground where instead of getting into the political fray, you can just say, go vote and express yourself. So I'm hopeful that message will kind of carry, and that's why I like working a lot with the League, because that's where they fall. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So you've been doing hackathon for a year now?
4 years. This is our fourth.
Fourth, okay.
Yes.
Are there any specific success stories or projects? I'd just like to know, what are you guys doing?
Sure. I could go on all night. You want another 20 minutes? I'll give you the highlights. Last year's winner, some of you might know him, Kenton Gray. He built an app called Rollout, where it's a native iPhone and Android app. You open it up, it geolocates you, and it says, here's your trash day, here's your recycling day, here's your heavy trash day, here's your lawn day. You set a push notification to remind you either the night before or the day of, and it tells you when to roll out. And it relies on the city's open data set of recycling days and trash days. We've had a lot of health inspection maps Last year's health inspection map was really interesting because you could slice it by cuisine style. So if you wanted to go to the cleanest Thai restaurant, or you wanted to go to the, whatever, you can find that. A lot of these apps are built based on open data, and a lot of it requires us to figure out what we want to build and then petition the city to open up the data. But there have been some really interesting applications over the years. Last year we had another winner took the campaign finance data set and normalized it. It was a failed project, but it was enlightening because if I ran for office, I could run as Jeff Reichman, Jeffrey Reichman, Jeffrey R. Reichman, J.R. Reichman, J. Reichman. You could write checks to all of those people and no one's ever going to figure it out. Wow. Yeah. So there's all sorts of data reporting issues related to campaign finance. We had a visualization of the general fund so that you could start to see physically like how much money is going to debt service and how much money is going to keep parks and libraries open. I think a lot of these projects are, the reason we call it Sketch City is because we do these sketches of things and try to understand a little bit more by looking at data what it means for the city of Houston. So, I mean, I can send you a list of probably 50 or 60 projects that have come out of it. Our batting average isn't that high in terms of long-lasting projects, but it seems to be a good opportunity to kind of test out new ideas every year.
Is there a website where we could find that list?
Yeah, I used to have it up on our website, and I took it down, but we're going to put it back up. You can also join our Slack. If you go to sketchcity.org, pop into our Slack. It's awesome. It's like an email replacement. It's goofy. We talk about all sorts of stuff. I want to map all the basketball hoops in Houston because I want to play basketball and I want to know where to go. So I put out a file there. Somebody else joins in and we work on projects. It's really a lot of fun. Any other questions? Awesome. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate this.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you all for coming. Go ahead and take your time, get another beer, enjoy each other's company. It's kind of the point to hear some really interesting, inspiring things, and then meet each other and keep talking about it. So feel free to stay as long as you want, and thank you all.